There's been some confusion lately about the issue of whether or not birds are reptiles, and I want to talk about it. The confusion comes from how science has changed over time, especially our system of classifying and organizing organisms, what we call taxonomy. Our system of naming organisms, we've got like the genus and species situation, like Felis domesticus, stuff like that. That originates from the 1700s. This guy, Carolus Linnaeus, came up with our naming system and categorization system. But this was the 1700s. This is before we knew about evolution. People back in the day thought that God had created each species individually and that they didn't change over time, they didn't go extinct, and new species didn't arise. They had just all been the same since creation. Linnaeus wanted to categorize everything in nature according to God's, perfect system, and did so by grouping them all by similarity. He noticed that there were a lot of organisms that had things in common, and he decided to group them together. And certain things are more similar to each other than others. And so he ended up with sort of a hierarchical system where we have some things that are very similar, almost exactly the same, that are in a species together. We have things that are slightly less similar, but still very similar in a genus, and so on and so on. And so he ended up with splitting everything into categories. Now, there are some problems with this system. The first is, how do you pick the right traits? For example, we think of mammals as, the guys with hair, give live birth, produce milk, etc. But there are some mammals that are hairless. So we kind of, make an exception for that. There are some mammals that lay eggs. There are some lizards that give live birth. So what makes us make these categories together and make these exceptions? The answer is kind of vibes. There's something about mammals that we recognize that they all have something in common. And the traits that we pick don't necessarily reflect this vibe. The other problem is evolution. Things do change over time. We do get new species. And, for example, birds evolved from animals with teeth and claws that didn't have beaks. But now we think of birds as having beaks, but we still know that Archaeopteryx belongs with the birds. That sort of vibe-based grouping that Linnaeus was picking up on is due to shared ancestry. That's really what unites these groups, is that they're all descended from a common ancestor. Scientists realized that evolution was a thing and that we should really be grouping things not based on traits that can change, but on ancestry, which is something that doesn't change. No matter how weird dog breeds get, they're all descended from a common ancestor that is a dog, which makes them dogs, no matter what. But because Linnaeus was picking up on something real, we kind of decided to keep his naming system. We still use genus and species. We've kind of ditched groups like family and order, etc., but we've kept genus and species. It's like we've put a brand new engine in a classic car. It runs very different, but it looks very similar. Now, especially in paleontology, we still talk in terms of traits, which can get confusing. For example, if you find a reptile fossil with a hole sort of in the nose area, you know that that's an archosaur because the anorbital fenestra is a classic archosaur trait. But we don't consider archosaurs to be defined as things with holes there. We consider archosaurs to be things descended from the first archosaur, and we support that hypothesis with the presence of the hole. So if we see something with that hole there, we can be like, that looks like an archosaur. I think it's related to archosaurs, rather than defining the group by that trait. So things are grouped based on their ancestry and what they're descended from. And because dinosaurs are reptiles and birds are descended from dinosaurs, that means birds are indeed reptiles.